Hello, everyone, and welcome to the broadcast. We are continuing our coding project today. We've got a decent little list of things that we want to get through. We'll see how far we do. Before we do that, though, let's check in with kitties. We do have Sky on the bed. Sammy is getting a drink of water, and everyone else is dodging the camera. Ember should be passing through there a moment. Hello, Ember. Hello. She was looking around. See, we might have Half Pint here. Not sure if they still are, but if they are, welcome. Give some knee back scratches here. Well, hey there, Cheesy. I do recall you. Welcome back. And hello, Dodds. Let's see. So, two, I think, immediate things we can look at is seeing if we can get Spiral and Orbit to deal with a source location. Which means effectively getting Spiral to deal with a source location. So what happens normally with Spiral is we have our growth rate, which is the expansion of the radius of the spiral. Cheese, it's most likely going to start off as a Steam thing. That doesn't mean it won't ever be an app on a website. Maybe there'll be a demo or something like that. One of the advantages with a code engine like this... Just a moment. One of the advantages of a code engine like this is that you can compile for various platforms. But actual release is some ways out, so we'll see what actually happens. So this is the rate at which the radius expands. So this controls how quickly the spiral widens out. This will also cap out at the maximum radius if it's there. So we check to see, has the scale been adjusted, multiplied, that kind of thing, and then make it in terms of squares. I know some folks that like to play the stream in the background. Hey there, Half Pint. Yeah, internet connections do be like that sometimes. So we'll try to expand the radius by the movement rate. It does make some of this calculation redundant during move. But if the radius has a max radius, it will stop expanding at that point. Then we're going to look at the angle change, which is also affected by the speed multiplier. And the speed adjustment. The higher the speed, the faster the angle rotates. Calculating. Okay. We calculate prior point up here. So this is. This is before we've messed with the radius or the angle. So we update our last angle by the amount of the change. And we get the number of steps that are going to happen. Or at least this is the fraction of the interactions here. Let's consider that. Let's make sure I understand what's happening. Can be useful when you're going back through the code to kind of speak through it. So this is our new angle. We're going to find out that can result in okay. We're truncating it. So we're going to increase the angle. Then we're going to find out well, hopefully it improves, Half Pint. So we're going to find out how many times, or at least how far along we are. So if we are past 360 with this, we're going to get at least one, and we're going to round that down to the nearest int. We're going to truncate the decimal places off of it by forcing it to an int. So then we're going to subtract that many 360s from it so that we don't overflow. At that resolution, you can probably hardly see it. So then we calculate the next point. And we're going to adjust the movement based on the next point in the prior point. This is ultimately another opportunity that we could have a transform that we're dealing with, or at least a vector that we're passing along to apply, so that we could have things like rotate it kind of stuff. So what we'll need to add to this, once we've determined what the last point to next point right here, once we know that vector, we also need to understand where the entity we're tracking is. So we're going to have to do a distance squared calculation. Dodds, the thing that we're looking at right now is movement that rotates like that. If there's a max radius, it would rotate or rotate in a fixed distance circle. So what we're working on right now, like at this moment, is to add a target entity in there. That is something that the spiral or the circle tries to center itself around. Okay, so this is effectively the same as what we were doing here. This is the distance on the spiral from the current point to the next point. We're pushing it in that direction. Next, what we need to do is determine how far the thing is from its target position. Or how far it is from its target entity. A float is equal to if targeter entity if there is an entity, we're gonna mess with the vector if there's an entity. All right, we're gonna. Okay, we need to know if the next point is too far away. Distance squared to target position. If distance to target squared is greater, it's not equal. Connection's definitely strained in there, Half Pint. So we've already determined what the radius is. Okay. If it's not at the right position, it's going to try to move in that direction. So we're going to move at the same rate that we grow in that direction. Oh. We can't rotate towards it. It's not really what we want to do. I don't really want to make it faster, though. And if we apply another speed vector to it, we're going to have to do a square root calculation here. Say target's position. So to the target position. Oh, it's not that. It's next point. How far is next point to the target's position? Because we want that to equal the radius squared here. Distance squared 2 is faster than distance 2, since you don't have to do a square root there. Square root is a non-cheap operation. Not super expensive in the terms of current processing, but we'd be doing this potentially multiple times a second, so fewer is better. Okay. How do we want to do this? Things are quiet sometimes, geez. So we need to move toward the target's position. But only so much that it gets us to where we need to be. Okay. Okay, we know what the actual target position is. We know where it wants to be. Okay. target's position plus next point. Okay, so we don't need a distance squared here. Hello, Demo Frog. A lot of people having to change their hand. A lot of people changing their handle today. By a lot, I mean two. So if next point does not equal should be at, then we want to rotate to move to point at should be at. Dodds, Cheese Earth, and Demo Frog over in the Tall Forum have either had to or willingly, or of their own accord, change their user handles. So half point, are you aware of what the cartoon was based on? Yes, they made a cartoon based on the game. They made a Earthworm Jim cartoon based on the game of the same name. Trying to think through the math here. So to move should be from next point to prior point. At a given length. But instead, if the next point is not where it should be at, we're going to make to move be a different vector, this target position, or to target position of the same length as the prior one. Hey, huge fan. I don't recall, Dodds, when the Earthworm Jim cartoon ran. One of the things that we're shooting for with the interactions with targets in this game is to not have the concept of a damage number. Instead, just to have number of times that it hits. The making things like projectiles being able to pass through or do area of effect kind of things more valuable, and also avoiding effectively the arbitrary number of damage and HP. Put another way, damage will be 1 on a projectile and will be unmodified. Creature HP will be multiples of 1. Sorry, integer multiples of 1. And we'll try to adjust projectiles to have some value if they're going to like fire slower, that kind of thing, so that fast firing projectiles do not dominate the use case. They'll still be by default really good, so we'll need other modifiers to deal with that. Direction 2. Should be at. 2 should be at. So now we have no, it's prior point. So this is calculating which actual direction we should move in to get into the position we want to be. Welcome back, Half Pint / Earthworm Jim. It is apparently bath time for Sky. Let's do a quick check on the cameras. We've got 2 on camera now. Mason sees something. What are you looking at, Mason? Might have to check that later. In case he has located a bug. Should be at times equals move dot length. So we have now created an alternate vector, and we're going to have it move at the same speed that it would have moved along the spiral. That's unfortunate, Earthworm. Hello, Ice Drakes. Welcome. Save a step here. Okay, so we get the position that it should be at, and we adjust it accordingly. The faster it can move, the faster it will get into position here. We may need to adjust this further. Okay, we'll find out. We'll find out. So we're going to go into... We're going to need to target the player. So random entity... Not a random direction. This is entity. We need the subtypes, though. We will need the subtypes. Because we still want them to act accordingly. We might not need a queue for that, though. We don't want to assume. We don't want to assume. I actually got around to watching Murder Drones recently. Really good, really good. I like some of the theming that's happening there. Track random enemy. Yeah, track random enemy does random enemy. So we should never actually use this one. This one just calls super, so we don't need to do anything with it. Okay. My favorite episode, Ice Drake. It's been pretty consistent about being the next one. It has flowed pretty well. I feel like episode 4 accomplished some things, but the core accomplishment could have potentially have been wrapped up in some other stuff. Episode 4 was the slowest one so far. But otherwise, in general, it's been kind of linear progression. I like where the whole plot is going, you know? I am interested in. So, in Digital Circus, in the running through the fake door to the exit is a moment where they show a old kind of molding CRT monitor in a cubicle, and it really looked like they used the same, at least the same location that we see in an office in Murder Drones. And I don't know if that's just asset reuse or if it's intended to be a point of crossover, you know? Possibly. Backrooms, like a lot of what used to be called and maybe still is creepypasta, is one of those things that I think uh, gets overly frequently compared to other media. As in, it becomes a point of reference for describing things, which can help in the translation, but it also can also create comparisons that don't necessarily help. Okay, I think we've got that correct now. Target player would be a target entity. Oh yeah, yeah. The idea of an endless office area is a reasonable comparison to Backrooms. So in target entity, we only need to update the entity if the entity is not set. And need to update direction. So if we don't have an entity, we're still going to update it. So we're going to make a new targeter, which will extend target entity. It's going to be target player. By doing things like that, they create, they give you a strong impression of what sort of point of reference or where this might be. It is a dangerous game as far as longevity or at least relevance of the media to make direct references like that. Since the thing that becomes that it is supposedly a reference to may fall out of common consciousness. And so it ceases to be a reference. It still works if it stands on its own. So like the Infinite Office stands on its own. A Rule 34 reference, the intent of it stands on its own. Because they're not making a direct reference. I think they're doing a pretty good job in Digital Circus in not having the direct, like, point at the meme and kind of wink. Which is where most of those fail, is that they rely on direct knowledge of it. Okay, so we have target player now. So then we're going to go into random, we're going to go into target entity, and we need apply template type, need to update entity, set entity, need to update direction. So we need to check our constants again. Then we need a target player. So long term, this might change to have more than one player. But for now, it's fine. So if we have not set it, it will always be we have not set it. Player. Never need to update the direction. Oh. No, no, no. We could extend track random entity. In the same way. Yeah, if we extend track random enemy. So then we don't need to... We should never need to update the entity. So if we have a direction, or we have not lost target, then we need to update direction. That's not actually correct. So when we're tracking a target, if we have not lost our target, then we need to update the direction to the target. But if we have lost target, we do not update the direction. So first we have to say it's not lost target. If we have not lost the target, then we need to update the direction. So this is an OR. So if we have lost the target, then we don't update. Hey there, map. Yeah, we're making a game using Godot engine. It's a Bullet Heaven or Vampire Survivor style game. The hook for it being that we use a modular weapon system where instead of just upgrading an existing weapon, by leveling it up, you upgrade it by getting kind of modules to add to it that change its behaviors. We don't give a direction if we never have a target. If we lose our target, then we don't ever update the entity again. Yeah. But we always update the direction if we haven't lost target. Yeah. So then when we're targeting the player, we set the entity to the player, and we don't mess with update direction. Because target random entity... I'm sorry, target track random entity. Oh, but no. We need a track entity. Yeah, I'm not... I was never terribly fond of using the name Bullet Heaven. It's derived from the bullet hell genre. It's meant to be it's the opposite of bullet hell. So instead of you dodging enemies that are firing, bullets everywhere, it is you firing bullets everywhere. But that description is dependent on knowing the other. So if I don't know what a bullet hell is, calling it a bullet heaven doesn't help. Because then it's like how I'm saying it's like Vampire Survivors, because that's the point of reference that a lot of people will have. And ultimately, the genres don't overlap heavily. The Survivor-style games that actually have enemy projectiles don't behave as much like Vampire Survivors, which does occasionally have projectiles, but it's not bullet hell at all. There are others that are like... It was something Till Dawn or something like that is closer to a bullet hell. That's the thing, though, Dots. The thing that ended up that caused the coining of Bullet Heaven doesn't have dodging of the type that Bullet Hells do. And it doesn't even remotely have the number of projectiles that Bullet Hells do. Bullet Hells are way above and beyond the number of projectiles that you get out of Bullet Heavens, and that's generally because probably because of resources and also because of screen clutter. It's where some Bullet Heaven style games actually fall short, is that they try to have so much of the dodging mechanics that your own projectiles, your own attacks, obscure what else you need to be doing. So they try to capture that bullet hell. I need to make sure that I'm constantly, micro adjusting my position. But then the screen is also flooded with explosions and projectiles from you that will obscure whether because of particles fully obscure or just because of noise. I don't know what would be the next game, Cheese. That would be very much determined at the time. Okay, so target track enemy is based off of random enemy. But I think we need more than this. Okay. Can take our about an hour break here. I will be right back in a few minutes. And I'm back. So yeah, Dods. Too much visual noise breaks bullet hells as a concept. Most of the games that are bullet hells, that are truly categorized that way, have very specific visual language. There is this is both what the player looks like and sometimes where the player can be positioned. Uh, but the player looks very distinct from everything else on the screen. Then often projectiles have one appearance. Uh, each hour, Cheese, I try to remember to each hour get up and move around a little bit. Sitting largely perfectly still for several hours on end isn't great for my back. Okay, how do we do? How do we do? So there's some variation here. Hello, Jillian. Welcome. Welcome on the Twitch side. More of a cat-themed android, Jillian. More of a cat-themed android. Here. Do. They. Mantis shrimp, huh? Um, photorealistic stylized, or you know, more of a kimono mimi style the mantis shrimp, or more of a monster girl style. Ah, okay, you were just making a declaration. I see. Interesting creature, those, aren't they? Mantis shrimps. Hey there, Annabelle. Welcome. I gotta watch for that, for sure. A mantis shrimp could cause harm if the if events line up wrong. Let's see who broke. Well, see the damage here. Ice Drake is definitely from prototype testing and had certainly nothing to do with the peaceful handover of control of the factory, which is something that was consensual and planned. Okay. So, one of the things that we ran into last time was the idea of passing functions in as things. So when we look at target random enemy, the thing that makes it random enemy uh, is when we set the entity. When we set the entity in here, where we see if there's an enemy, set it. Let's see. Mine don't steal socks. Let's see. The closest thing I have to a thief cat is Mason, and he steals plushies. So, Ice Drake, if you're interested, uh, the Discord has links to the series of Twitter posts that led up to the debut, and the debut stream has some longer form description of the lore. Hey there, Awe. Welcome. So yeah, it's this set entity is what makes target random enemy a random enemy targeter. But otherwise, it's a target entity. So we could go in and we could have Like, it doesn't have a direction. Set the direction. We could have this be the same as target random enemy. While that is technically a generic phrase, Ice Drake, was that meant to be a reference? And Jillian, that cat is Ember, who has just noticed something. I don't know what. Let's do a quick cat check since we're host break here. And yes, Sapphire, at the... Oh, man. Ember has gone full meerkat there for a moment. What does she see? Unclear. So let's see here. The one that you could see moments ago and still can is Ember. The gray and white one is Sky. Those are the smallest and largest of my cats, respectively. So if we have a targeting library here, we could go into Targeter and we could set up a series of functions. Ember is actually really small. She's pretty small for a domestic shorthair. So if in Targeter we had a series of functions that we define for the purposes of use in those in these other methods, then we remove the need to have the individuals retarget accordingly. Because I can just reuse the methods. So those just joining and wondering what I'm doing, we are coding a game, and right now I'm trying to think through how I want this part of the targeting to actually work. Because when we're aiming at an entity or similar, we just want to override particular parts. So target entity and the equivalent of track entity don't actually work on their own. Or I'm sorry, so target entity. It says get a thing. And it will give us at the time that it is initially set. are you stalking, Ember? I think she can see a fly or something. Because her pupils are half dilated. So she's trying to keep track of something, but it's a specific something. If you're unfamiliar with that, the degree that a cat's pupils are dilated is how they're watching for stuff. So fully dilated means they're just kind of taking in the whole scene. Fully narrowed means they're locked onto a particular thing. They're focusing on that thing. So getting a random enemy, I think, should be in our global nodes. I don't like the name of global nodes, but anymore. Because global nodes is essentially just global functions. Generic things. So like get random direction is here. Function get random enemy. It's an entity. Then we can go into target random enemy. Take that. So we have an entity to return. If enemy zone. If there is one, then to return is equal to that, and we return to return. Okay. Hello, daily quote. Well, geez, we don't have a vampire in this. We have a catbot. Or a Nyanite, as it were. Okay, right there. That's not working. So little guy in the center there. Log. What is the mouse using? Thanks for swinging through, Cheese. What game, quote? What game did you make an interior design in? So the homing mouse has move track enemy. Move track enemy uses track random enemy. Okay. So then track random enemy we're gonna... Huh. Okay, so we got rid of that conflict there. Target random enemy. Okay, so we're watching for the first one. The mouse did not trip set direction. Why did it not trip set direction? Doesn't have a direction. It should have tripped it. Okay, so the mouse isn't doing target random enemy. Let's reload the project here. Okay, so it should be... We're doing some debugging here. The mouse is not moving how it should initially. Track enemy. Target track random enemy. Okay, so the mouse should be using track random entity. Ah, oh, okay. If we don't have a direction, we're going to call it at least once. That's why that was that way. Okay. Modes. Get random enemy. So we can see the mice can pivot at about 90 degrees a second. That is the default. Okay, so we have getRandomEnemy in setEntity. So that determines how we track. We have turn rate and lost target. So if we make a track entity, then we can get turn rate and lost target. It looks at what its entity is and behaves accordingly. Target entity doesn't do anything when it sets direction. So, as is to be expected, we haven't yet moved on to the things that I wanted to get to today. Because to get to those things, I need target player to work. But target player currently faces overlap with particular functions. Because a track random enemy is similar to target random enemy, but it's also similar to track random enemy. So what we could do for some of these is in the init, we set a particular function that we can make generic. So target entity will always try to get the entity and then the direction. Because that's where it's relevant. So the global nodes is currently where it's most useful. So if we have lost the target, we update the entity to be nothing, just in case. Okay, so the reason that we're stumbling here is that set direction for track random entity is to some extent universal. So in target an entity, we could set its direction. We know that if we get an entity, we could set direction to that entity. Correct, Ice Drake. Aside from, early messing around with things like basic and similar, this is actually my first game. My first time using Godot engine and using GD script, that sort of thing. Not my first time coding by any stretch, but first time making a game. We're doing this on stream, and largely it's kind of a by the seat of our pants kind of thing. So, tracking the entity. If we have no entity, so we don't have an entity and we don't have a direction, we set the direction to be random. Then, if we have an entity to move, which should always be true with a targeter. Second, we're gonna make a commit here. Two separate commits, one for getting rid of the old movement objects and one for starting this refinement process here. So this is tracking. Like, as far as a targeter, this would be track the entity. Hey there, JGamer, welcome. Welcome, welcome. This is tracking an entity with a turn angle. We could track infinitely fast, but I think still having a turn direction is valid. Yeah, okay, so we can have a global node's face target, which would be an entity, a turn rate, and a delta. All right. Ah. We need a current direction too. We're going to need to restructure this a little bit because we're not messing with current direction. Turn is a vector 2. So if we don't have a current direction and we don't have a target, then we're going to return to return. That is equal to current direction. So then, if we get a direction 2, and we don't have a current direction, then we're going to start with the direction to it. We're just going to snap right to it. Else. So if we don't have a current direction, we just snap right to it. If we do have a current direction, we're going to rotate it based on the turn rate. Then we will turn to return. And this will be a turns a vector 2. Then we go in. So, okay. So when you call into face target, you get a Thanks for swinging through, Ice Drake. Okay, so you pass in a target where the target, where you are currently facing. Like, what direction we are currently looking at. What the entity that we're going to mess with is. And our delta. So this is, we're figuring out from the entity to move, we figure out what the direction to it is. If we don't have that, we just point at that entity right away. Otherwise, sorry, if we don't have a current direction, we just use it. But if we do have current direction, we're going to adjust it to try to get it to the direction that we currently have. Sorry, we're going to take the direction that we currently have and rotate it to the one that we've obtained. And we do need to have the entity to move check here. Yeah, we should have those checks because this one is not in the context of a targeter. Okay, so now we have a global way to call and face a target. That is, if we have a target and an entity, we can also pass in where it's currently, what it's currently doing, and a turn rate and a delta. So we can start rotating it towards that at a given pace. So if we track a random entity, we are targeting an entity. And then in the we're going to change our update direction, we're going to change our set direction, and we're going to change our set entity. The set entity will do the target random entity, or target random enemy bit here. Oh, that will create a problem if we do it that way. So when we're tracking a random enemy, if we set that entity to null, then its parent function would mess with it. Since target random enemy, once it's got an entity, it sticks to it. Yeah, we need to adjust some of this further. Just step away for a break a little sooner than normal. Be right back in a few minutes. And we're back. So when we're targeting the random enemy, we get random enemy. Which is a reasonable override to use. And track random enemy is only different from track an entity in that it overrides the set. Because a random enemy is a specific thing that we can retrieve. That's how it gets the entity. Yeah. And tracking is a generic thing as well now. So if we go into track random enemy, we could just say that direction is equal to global nodes dot base target. We have entity save and reload project. Welcome back, Dots. Move, turn rate, delta. Hello, Ember. We're working on getting more of this stuff abstracted. Target, our current direction, what entity we're dealing with, our turn rate, and our delta. Okay, we're going to change this from entity to move to current position. I acknowledge you, Ember. I do. It says not enough. Ember, 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 Ember. Yeah, because we don't actually care about the entity to move in here. We just care about where it is relevant to everything else. Position. Hey, 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 hey. Just climbing up on our shoulder. Hey there, Copper. Yep. We got live right on time. Yeah, Ember was climbing all over me there. I wasn't petting her right. Okay, mice are still targeting. So now we have a generic function for facing the target. So tracking an entity is where we're going to add lost target and turn rate. And when we target an entity, by default, we can just use get random direction when we set direction. I'm sorry, we can... we don't want to track the target when we update it. So we're targeting the entity by default in a target entity. And by default, we can set the direction to it at the time. Which would make target entity, which would make target random enemy just need to override set enemy, set entity. Yeah. So when we're targeting an entity and we set the direction, then it's either going to be a random direction because at the time we have no entity, or, I'm sorry, it's going to be a random direction because we don't have an entity, or it's going to be the direction to that entity. How we set the entity will vary. In this case, it will never actually set the entity. So it will constantly try to set the entity. And if it does actually get one, it would get a random direction. So what it's going to do is every time it's queried, it will say, set it to nothing, like do nothing, and do nothing, because it will never be anything but null. This is meant to be overridden. No, so what we're doing here, Dodds, is we're trying to make the inheritance flow cleanly. So, tracking an entity is one thing. It's whenever we move, we track the entity. So it's very similar to targeting an entity, but it, instead of just doing this, this part of set direction, it will do an alternate here. So if we look at track random enemy here, we have a special logic that says I will call into the super function, which is, let's change that. We are actually using the variable, so we don't underscore it. When we set the entity, so we haven't lost our target, and we don't already have one. So if we have lost our target, or we already have an entity, we won't update it. This doesn't seem right. So if we've lost our target, anyway, so when we're tracking an enemy, we update the direction only if we have a valid target. So if we lose target, as in the entity is ever null, or we have the entity that we're looking at is no longer alive, as in it hasn't been scrapped, or it has been scrapped, then we stop caring about the entity and we just let it continue in whatever direction it was going. As in, we stop tracking if there's nothing to track. But we're facing the target here, so that's good. It's how do we want to set the entity in a tracking scenario? Because if we've lost the target, then we don't update the entity. So if we haven't lost the target yet, as in it's the first time we've dealt with this, and we don't have an entity. Yeah, this is very dependent on this part, which is true. Is if we've lost the target, oh man. We need to reconfigure this whole thing because it's working effectively despite itself. The flow works as it is, but it doesn't look right, which is a long-term problem because it will trigger exactly what I'm doing right now, is I'm trying to parse it because it doesn't make sense at a quick glance. So if we're tracking it, if we lose the target, if we ever lose the target, then we're going to clear the entity. And we won't update the direction anymore. So this really should be an end. If I have not yet lost the target, and I don't have a direction, then I need to update it. No. Ugh. If I have not yet lost the target, I need to update it. Alternately, if I haven't set it yet. Now, if I call update direction, this is never going to be relevant. It's if I have an entity and I've not yet lost the target. It's just I haven't yet lost the target. I will always update the direction if I haven't lost the target. If when I set the entity, if I don't get an entity, I will lose target. Because we'll update the entity first, because we're tracking, we are targeting an entity. So we're gonna test that. Okay, so the initial movement is failing. That shouldn't be the case. We already have an entity and it's not alive. We've lost the target. Okay, that's why. That's why we have or not direction. Because if we haven't... Well, no. This should be false. If we've lost the target because that happens... Yeah. So this makes sense. Hey there, Frederick. We're trying to refine how we're doing this target random enemy and target track random enemy. The idea of tracking an entity, I feel, is distinct of... as in, it's a logical extension of target entity, in that it overrides the direction set. But it still sets an entity. It deals with an entity in the same general way. It could be its own unique thing, ultimately. So when we target an entity, we just aim at it. And if we don't have one, we move in a random direction. When we're tracking, it's the set direction that changes. If we're dealing with a random enemy or similar, it's the set entity that changes. So target random monster extends target entity. Track random enemy would extend track entity. Because the one tracks and the other one doesn't. These all feel like I've got object extension that doesn't need to be. Hello, LA. Hello. Welcome. You are joining us for our coding stream. Because we still need to leave room for how we set the entity. I feel like having some special globals up at the targeter level is potentially useful. Because then in the init of the object, we can set what their functions actually are. So when I'm targeting a random enemy, the set entity function is different. It's the same as what any other set random target random enemy is, which is this. Which is get random enemy. So this whole function is what any target random enemy would use. So when we're doing a target random enemy, it's not that we have a specific class instance. It's that it is a target entity with set entity replaced by this function. We can't make this a static because there is a entity involved. We could have an overriding function where entity is equal to thing, but that's not universal. The set entity part is what's universal, as in all set entities receive this. Be really useful if I could make it a static. But a static can't have this kind of thing. A static would need to return. And I generally never like the idea of altering a parameter. So the idea of if I pass it would be like if I pass entity into here and then I manipulate entity, the problem is that that is a variable reference. And I don't want to be able to set a null equal to that. That could cause a problem. It also leads to ambiguities. But it would allow us... No, it still wouldn't allow it to work right. I think this needs to be a special function of targeters. Is at the targeter level, I could have set entity to random enemy kind of thing. And then when I'm configuring... it still is referencing it as a static. As in every member would have that. No, every member would have that. So I can just say its set entity is equal to that value. Because I don't want too many of these inherited classes. It leads to the kind of scenario that we're in right now. Welcome back, Cheese. I could update set entity. Okay, if I update set entity to be a public function, then I can have essentially overrides in it that within a targeter, let me verify here. Get entity. It is within a target entity. There is the concept of setting the entity. We're working on the class inheritance structure of targeter, Cheese. Targeters have an entity and a direction, so in theory they should have a set entity. This is coding in general, Cheese. So target entity. Need to set values is overridden. Check for entity and then direction. So when we're targeting an entity, we always say entity and then direction. That's not universal, though. What language does Game Maker Studio operate in, Cheese? So I guess what I'm getting at is you're looking at the complexity of the logic that I am setting up. You're not looking at the complexity of GD script or of Godot in general. You can have very simplistic logic in Godot engine. As in GD script could have your program could have simplistic logic. I could code this in C# and it could be just as complex or simple, depending on what I'm trying to accomplish. So one of the things I'm wondering here is I could have first entity in a direction. like in an arc in front of me. But I think we should just keep this. Yep. I guess what I'm getting at, Cheese, is there's no greater complexity here. It's Godot is not functionally more complex. It's I could be using the node infrastructure, and if the program that I was trying to make was simple enough, I don't need to set much of it. I can load a scene, I can load basic physics, and I could have objects move around. So, receive input, do this thing. A lot of those are basic logic that Godot can handle. But I'm not doing any of that basic logic. All of this is custom logic because it needs to be custom. So, regardless of which platform I would be using, I would have to write this kind of logic because there's no engine that fundamentally has the logic that I need. There is nothing about Godot or GameMaker that replicates this because it's my own invention. Wouldn't matter if I was using Unreal Engine, Godot, GameMaker, Xfinity back in the day, Unity. I would have to write this. So if every targeter goes into set values, targeter has set values, right? Yeah. It needs set values. I like that I call this twice. But that should still be okay. Because this should be overriding whether it needs to set the entity, and in set values it should be updating set direction here. Yeah. I can move this all up into targeter. Because I should always be determining whether I need to update an entity or a direction as well. And that. How is it better, Cheese? Like, can you articulate the better? Is it a performance thing? Is it a features thing? So need to update direction is always that. So that doesn't actually change. And it's in set direction that it's actually relevant in target a direction. So we're going to briefly set our mouse to some different stuff here. So we're going to set it to move random direction instead of move track enemy. Okay, move random direction is still working. Okay. Okay. So now, when we're looking at it, target direction, and this is technically target random direction at the moment, but fixed direction will override the direction, and thus, in the targeter function of need update direction, it will have a direction, so it will never call set direction, so it will never set it to random. Okay. Which makes this as simple as possible. Okay. Which means this could be a method by itself. I could say that the set direction of this targeter is this function. So then when we're targeting an entity, just by itself, we set the direction equal to the direction to the entity if we have one. Now, the extra reason that I won't be using Unity is that the company behind Unity and many of the particularly many of the executives of the company behind Unity, are kind of scummy. And the company has recently tried to pull some things that are very hostile to developers. So we won't be doing that. When I originally poked at like engines and whatnot, Unity was the one that I initially looked at because, I mean, at the time it was kind of the indie dev darling. I didn't like the library loading when it came to doing things like loading C# libraries, and they were very, very slow about updating their mono compiler. Like, their version of the mono compiler was always at least one full version behind. In that particular case, at least 2 versions. And a lot of the methods that I wanted to use were in up-to-date languages like C#. But I couldn't because it required like an older compile, which wouldn't use those libraries. But I suspect as we go along, Godot will get increasingly efficient at a lot of things because its development is community driven. It is a free community driven platform. It is overseen and maintained by a group of people, but it is not a for-profit corporation kind of thing. Yep, Frederick. When the alternative is Unreal Engine, pretty much all of the other platforms look look lightweight. Unreal Engine being the being incredibly powerful, but boy. Yep. Godot was building up in the shadow of Unity. I think given enough time, you might have seen Godot start to eclipse it. But yeah, it was the Unity debacle. I mean, from what I've seen of people using Game Maker, it is a perfectly serviceable platform. I'm not familiar with the things that it does particularly well or badly, but from what I understand, it's as solid an option as any of the others. So we're just targeting the entity. We use whatever the entity is and aim its direction. So by itself, target entity can't do anything. So this is toEntity or random. Upcoming surgery can be a anxiety-inducing thing, yeah. So this is effectively a set direction to entity or random. And then when we're tracking an entity, how is this not failing? Oh, because this. This is tracking the entity. It's this set direction is set the direction equal to whatever face target returns. And when we're setting the entity in a track function, when we're tracking it will always be that we set the entity unless we've lost target. So this one is not something that I can set at the targeter level. I feel like tracking the entity is where we get to here. Yep. Undertale was Game Maker. At least I think that's what I heard. In general, it's figure out what kind of game you want to make, as well as the sort of visuals that you want it to have. Look up the kind of engines, or figure out which engines are suitable to that task, and then choose the language that is compatible with those engines that you want to use. So, like, if you pick Godot, you've got to use GDScript or C#. I think you can use C-level C++, but I'm not sure. But I know C# and GDScript for sure. So if you don't like those, you don't want to use Godot. Okay, so recapping what I'm currently stuck on, and thus not doing all of the things that I wanted to do today, is that I'm trying to reduce the amount of inheritance that I'm doing. I don't want as many child classes because we just hit a point where there is entangling amongst the different child classes. So, like, target a random entity, essentially find a random entity and just point at it that one time, um, that entity in that current direction and then never do anything again is also shares logic with track that entity, in that it they both target a random enemy. They get them the exact same way, but the difference is one of them uses tracking for how it sets direction and one of them doesn't. And if it's tracking, it sets the entity slightly differently. And I think that's where with tracking, the set and you would use tracking set entities. But I would still like to have the option to use this, as in this is a just set entity to a random enemy. Ooh. Okay, it potentially makes things more complicated, but set entity is an internal function. As in, it's only being called from inside. Oh, because some of them are going to do, some of them are going to do more complicated stuff here. So I think this is still the pattern. It's when I call this, do exactly this. So this is the most simplistic one, is set the entity to a random entity. To a random enemy. So if I didn't want to have a child class for it, this is to entity or random direction, and this is to a random enemy. By a template, we override what the entity is. We override what the direction is. So we wouldn't want it to be an init that we set the entity. Because we could be calling a function that is irrelevant, because we could be setting a template over it right away. And we don't want any init logic that might set the direction, because we could be overriding it right away. That would all be redundant logic, or at least wasted logic. Oh, dear, 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 dear. We would apply the template, and then we would initialize it. Okay, okay. When we are initializing, we could have two functions. Initialize the direction and initialize the entity. Because getting the entity is something that we could set right away. And just say, this is my entity initialize function. You know, entity equals initialize function. Now, because some of them are going to need to know this kind of stuff. Like, should update entity might need to change its entity every so often. That is a plausible use case. Every X seconds, pick a new target. Semi-overcomplicating this, but I still want to know. I still want to make it as flexible as possible. Okay, I could simplify for now. This is how tracking works. And when I target a random enemy, I can just do that. All right. This assumes that the super entity is actually what sets the random entity, and that's not what I want to have happen. And I don't want to set it in the catalog. I can't remember what it's called when you have a method defined at the time. If you're making progress in Game Maker and it's suitable to the kind of game you want to make, then stick with Game Maker. If you're having difficulties with Game Maker, if it's not working for you, then figure out if some other platform will work for you. You know, if you don't like GML, then looking at how the other ones are structured and how they function might give you an idea of what other things work. If it's not suitable to the kind of game you're making, then look up a different one. Like, figure out what ones are suitable to that kind of game. But if it's working, I don't see a reason to change. It is, Jillian. It is. I don't know what your context is, but you know. This is the part we need to change to make tracking more abstractable. Because this is flat to tracking. This is flat to tracking. This is flat to tracking. All of those work just for tracking. This is the part that we need to figure out to make it so that we can swap that in without having to update functions. We could have a method that is set tracked entity. So in the case of tracking, you would need to set a particular function there. How do we replace that one cleanly? Jillian, is there a reason you're giving this tirade in Twitch chat? I'm just wondering. This is indeed true, but I wonder why this is the forum you have chosen. So if I can abstract this enough, I can change it. I just don't want to have to know that it's a tracking function to set that. That might be required, though. Because I could have set tracked entity with the same values put in place. Hey there, parakeet. Yeah, but it's a robot parakeet. That's entirely different. Now, if it was a droid cat, that might be entirely different. Or more similar. Haven't gotten to viewer integration yet, Lunar, no. entirely normal and non-violent. I mean, all of the quote-unquote weapons are just cat toys. Not harmful at all. So tracking needs to be a separate entity because it has the concept of losing target and turn rate. Okay. Tracking is a separate thing. The purring test. Okay. So we are going to make a new thing. It's called track entity. And when we're doing a target entity, the difference is that it gets a random direction if it has an entity. If it doesn't have an entity. Otherwise, it is the direction to that entity. So for target entity to work, its set entity needs to be something different. So that can be overridden with a given function. So we could have in targeter, we could have a series of methods that are meant to be known. I can't treat it like a singleton, can I? I mean, it ultimately doesn't really matter. Because we could have a series of overrides here. So we could have a set entity to random kind of thing in here, where if I set that, if I override set entity with that method, then I don't have to update a targeter to be specifically a target entity. Because I could just have set direction to be this, which is to entity or random. And then instead of random enemy extending that target entity, I would just need to set entity equal to, set entity to random enemy. So the initialization of the targeter would set this equal to one of those other ones. So this set entity would be changed to set entity 2 kind of thing. I think we can do that. Because then target random enemy is not overriding anything. And we could just add a constant in it of targeter to be get type, and then there is a type string that it returns. And so in the declaration of the targeter, I set the type string equal to that. It removes this as a static, like this is effectively a static function, but I don't know that it's treating it that way. Yeah, it's only tracking needs to be different. Only tracking needs to be different because it has different variables. Okay, I think we can do this. I think we can do this. So there. So if I use this function in place of set entity, then I will get this result. I don't need a child class to do this. So in the catalog, I would have set entity to random entity to random enemy in here. Tracking is different. Tracking would have a separate function that I would use, but I could still use to random entity, right? To random enemy right here for its set tracked target. Set tracked entity, essentially. Okay. Because then I don't need target random enemy as a unique class. Instead, it's setting it. Okay. So then in a targeter, we have type string. So then in targeter, when we call get type, we're going to return type name. And then in the catalog, we can set the type name. Because we'll just consult it during that. And when we clone, we don't need to override the type name. Right? We'll ensure that, because there might be specific typing to that when we set it, just to be sure. Just to be sure. I don't think that's actually necessary. No, the apply template would come into play, because we might be stamping a different template over it. Don't think it's necessary, but I'm going to put it there. So then we want to change it so the targeters are setting that constant there in the catalog. Targeters. So this is targeter dot type name. Targeter. And target random direction would just have an override for its set direction, which is set direction to random. So in targeter, just so. And then in our target random direction, we have that. We're not going to override should set direction, because what that does is if I don't have a direction, call set direction. In target random direction in the catalog, I would be using that. Okay, in theory, this'll work. Man, that would be so nice. So this is being treated as a constant that I am not allowed to change. image. Don't want to have to do an override though. What is it called when you do this, where you override a function? It's a callable. We could build it into the function that set direction is a callable function that normally we set to something else. Just like we would if we were invoking an event. All right, I need to think on this further. This is our current sticking point. Let's see. Let's check a couple of things here. I think we're going to call it here for today. I think that's what we're going to do. Well, hey there, one. You're arriving just at the end. We are working on... Today we were working on how to target, how to abstract the targeters. We hit a roadblock in how we're going to override a method, because we need to override it at runtime, not as an inheritance thing. So I think I need to use a callable structure for it, where we are going to say that the method to invoke is this, as opposed to call this function. So I think we can still get there. And once we have this in place, it is easier for us to make new targeters. And potentially then, we can extend some of that logic into movers, because some of them will have similar logic. But for now, we'll deal with that. We'll deal with that. But yeah, I hope you all had a good time watching with us today. As is tradition, we didn't get to what I initially planned to get to, but we still made progress. Hopefully we'll have more of that tomorrow. The progress, I mean. If you like what you saw and would like to see more, remember to like, follow, subscribe, all of that stuff. Again, we will be back to this tomorrow. That's kind of the plan for this week, is all coding. I feel like that's where I'm getting the most out of it. 4 p.m. US Central is when we normally stream. I will mark that one as visible. Let's make sure I don't forget. Let me do that now. Set that one. And we'll set this one. There we go. So the streams for tomorrow have been set to visible, set to public. So if you want to see those, take a look at the YouTube channel. You can set reminders and the like. All right, folks, I do hope you have a good rest of your day, and goodbye for now.